Thank you very much for that kind introduction. I greatly appreciate it. As we get started here, we it's always important to express gratitude. So, thank you to everyone today here who made time on your Friday morning. You probably weren't leaving the house anyway because it's snowing outside and no one's going anywhere with COVID. But thank you all for being here. Paul Mahalski for your leadership and coordination to make NCS what it is. If you do the math on this, I mean, there's 50 odd people on the call today. Paul, and the other folks who coordinate these things, you've probably done this for hundreds of likely thousands of men over the years that you've been doing it, Paul. So tip of the hat to you. Thank you for that. One man's selflessness, and there's many others like you, make it so that NCS is here for all of us today and growing a population for tomorrow. So today I'm going to, what I'll share with you, and there'll probably be some hems and haws because it's not my strong suit to talk about myself, but that's what I'm going to do today. I'm going to share with you my life version, my life journey, and some of the men in my life who have made it that I am who I am today and shaped me. But before I do, a little current events just to catch you up. I'm not sure if you guys are tracking this development, but there's many transnational organizations engaging our military all over the world. Recently, I think it was in the last few days, there were reports out of an undisclosed location in the Middle East. A U.S. Marine was reported to be separated from his unit in the, I believe it was northern Iraq-Syria border on the backside of a mountain area known to be occupied by ISIL, the Islamic extremists there. Local ISIL commander, he was alerted. He dispatched 2 vehicles with approximately 10 ISIL fighters in there to go apprehend the Marine. As you would expect, there was a gunfight. An hour later, none of his fighters are returned or reported back to the commander. So the commander says, all right, fine, we'll send out 4 vehicles, 20 odd fighters to get this Marine. Again, gunfight ensues, and this time was even bigger than before, as you would expect, 20 guys coming to get a Marine. An hour later, still no fighters had returned or reported back to the commander. This guy's losing his patience. He wants the Marine. It's good. It's good propaganda. Get it on BBC, CNN, Al Jazeera, etc. So he gathers all his local forces, which total about 100 fighters, and they go to get this Marine on the backside of the mountain range. Third time, big gunfight erupts. This time, one of the fighters made it back to report to the commander. He's pretty banged up. And his dying words to the commander were, don't send any more fighters. It's a trap. There is not a Marine on the backside of the mountain. There are 2. So that's how we'll open up today. We were talking before about the Old Testament, and the confidence and veracity of a Marine is difficult to overstate. And it's a brotherhood that we have all learned in throughout our training, and it's what makes us special. So I want to run through a few people here that have been very influential in my life. There's 22 of them. I'll likely not get to all of them, but maybe some of them we can address in the question and answer. So where do I begin? Where's the logical beginning? Where is that? Paul's going to cringe because he's like, Charles, I want you to talk about you, but it's difficult to even start the conversation about me without starting with my father. So my father, huge influence on my life, potentially the largest influence in all of our lives was our father, and certainly as children. He was born in 1937 in Western Hungary, the old country. While he did not walk uphill both ways to school in the snow, he did, however, carry firewood to his one-room schoolhouse, as did all of his classmates. He showed me I've been over there, and he showed me the schoolhouse that he was at, and it still is as it was in the late 1930s, early 1940s. He left formal school and middle school to pursue an apprenticeship as a woodworker to provide income to the family. Just for perspective, the income of my father's family was such that they could afford meat about once a month. Just think about that with all the largesse that we have here and the privilege. And it was the way of the world at the time. It wasn't tremendously unusual for someone to leave school to pursue a trade. In 1944, he was witness to a travesty of epic proportions. The Nazis bought a train in town and parked it on the outskirts of town, 4 houses from where my father lived. He was 6. My son today is 6. So I think about that for perspective. The Jews in my father's town were rounded up and put into railroad cars. This would take many days. My father, being a curious boy, my 6-year-old boy is a curious boy, would walk around by the train cars. The Jews would pass notes to my father to share with their families to let them know where they were. My father would run these notes to the neighborhoods to deliver them to the families. At the end of this, my father had notes to deliver, but nobody was there to receive the notes. Everyone had been rounded up. That was 1944. My father watched this firsthand. He witnessed this. It's 2021 today. It's not that long ago. Later, in 1944, at the ripe age of 7, my father would transition from Nazi occupation to communist Russian occupation, from the frying pan to the fire. 12 years later, in 1956, during the brief Hungarian Revolution, my father escaped to Austria. He walked. Think about that. Think about how bad your life must be, that you leave everything you know, your home, your family, your language, your friends, your culture, for a better life. It's happening today in a much different, hyper-politicized environment. The faces look different, and the media manipulates the stories to get clicks, but the reasons are very similar. My father and a friend would make their way here to Camp Kilmer, New Jersey, which, for those of you keeping score at home, is now Rutgers University. The library on Rutgers University is the Kilmer Library. My father and a friend would take a bus from Camp Kilmer, Chicago, to link up with other Hungarians. To this day, they both reside in Wisconsin and are friends. God help those 2 boys walk from Hungary to Austria and live wonderful lives in Wisconsin. God did that. My father and mother would meet years later in Wisconsin and start their lives in the Northwoods of Wisconsin. What town, you ask? A very common question. Certainly from those of us here out on the East Coast where there's towns are reference points. No town. If you know Madison, Wisconsin, it's 2.5 hours due north into the woods, 5 miles from a gas station that sold white bread, bananas, and milk, called a grocery store. I grew up as an only child on a generous sized property with my mother, father, and German Shepherd in the middle of the woods. My childhood was one of privilege as I understood life. I had everything I could imagine would want in life: love, food, shelter, clothing, homemade wooden toys for my father, a warm bed. I ran with my dog everywhere, literally storybook-esque. He was my best friend. We would run through the woods, down the creek, in the fields. Life was grand. My father would build our house by hand in his free time with any help I could offer him. It took him years, but it was my palace. God blessed me with more than I could ever dream for. My father would start Saturday afternoons with the same story. Every Saturday, or so it seemed. Son, in his thick Hungarian accent. In most countries, people cannot afford a car. We have a car and a truck. He would then start the truck. Son, in most countries, even if you can afford a car, you may not have access to fuel or to have money for fuel. He would pull out of the driveway and start the journey to town. Son, in most countries, even if you have a car and fuel, you may not have the freedom to travel on the main roads or go far from your home. God blessed me with a father who would make sure I heard history and would not forget it. God blessed me with freedoms, and my father would make sure I did not take these sweet freedoms for granted. On the way to Saturday evening mass, we would stop at the gas station for fuel, milk, bananas, and bread. And my father would say, son, in most countries, you have to wait in line for fuel. Son, in most countries, there is not fresh fruit. If there is, there are lines that are blocks long. After the extravaganza of the gas station, we would go to mass. This is where my father's gentle words really resonated. Son, in most countries, you are not able to practice a religion. And if you do, it is the religion the government wants you to practice. I love going to Mass, singing, listening to the sermon, the readings. It was so exciting to hear the stories of the Bible. It still is today. God blessed all of us with the Bible as a tool to learn from, to guide our lives. Attending Mass and Catholic education were an important part of my childhood. We would attend Saturday evening Mass at a church 5 miles from our house, where the priest would drive in from over an hour away to say one Mass a week in our church, All Saints Church, All Saints Parish. I was an altar boy. The most fun of being an altar boy was ringing the large bell at the back of the church before the priest processed down the aisle to the altar. The entire town of Babcock could hear me ringing the church bell. It was a tiny town and a fairly large bell. God blessed me to be an altar boy. I even had the privilege of being a reader sometimes. My father was great. He still is. He taught me how to hunt small game. He taught me to fish. He taught me how to cut down trees for firewood. He taught me how to split firewood. He taught me how to stack firewood. All are unique skills. He taught me how to work with wood, how to create, how to build. He taught me math and fractions at a young age. This helped me so much in life. He taught me that honey will get you further than vinegar. It took me way too long to realize the veracity of this concept. My father was a volunteer firefighter. He was unequivocally my hero. He still is. God blessed me with a father who gave me everything he could. Morris, my mother's brother. He was smooth as silk. His feet never touched the ground. He just floated when he walked. He dressed sharp. He was tall and handsome. His voice was deep and powerful. He owned every room he walked into. Anywhere he was, you thought he had been there 100 times before, but he had not. Then I saw an old picture of him in uniform before he went to Vietnam. I saw the look in those eyes. I was 7. It was done. It was over. The look in those eyes was a special intensity still found in the eyes of Marines today. I told my parents at age 7 I wanted to be a Marine. They poo-pooed my idea, as perhaps you should, of old outlandish ideas of a 7-year-old boy. It was 1979, and God blessed me with the dream to be a Marine. God blessed me with Morris as my uncle. Little known fact about me, if I grow out my hair, which none of you have ever seen, I look very much like a Native American. It is not terribly relevant to most of the people on this call. However, in northern Wisconsin, there are plenty of negative stereotypes about Native Americans, particularly around hunting and fishing activity. My black hair and fuller face were starkly different from the light hair of the Scandinavian and angular faces of the Germanic people I was raised around. There was a family with what seemed like 10 brothers, let's call them the Smith brothers, who made it their business to give me a hard time. Literally, every day, every recess, every bus ride, every unsupervised opportunity, they took advantage. I pushed back as best as I knew how. I stood my ground, if you will. Their attack was coordinated. Their attack was offensive. My activity was reactionary and defensive until one day, one of the brothers sucker punched me square in the face as he walked off the bus in the middle of this trail of brothers that was leaving the bus. They all laughed at me as the blood immediately trickled out of my nose. I was stunned. The bus door closed before I could muster a thought. Turns out the brother who sucker punched me was about 2 years older than me. The next day, first recess, I went on the offensive. I found the brother who sucker punched me the day before. He was with his friends, no brothers. He was taller, much taller and bigger than I remembered. He laughed at me as I launched my offensive. My father had very intentionally raised me to think versus fight. He's a very peaceful man. And he wanted me to be peaceful. It was the first time in my life I had truly been on the offensive. The consequences were a call to my parents, which was a much smaller deal than I could have ever anticipated, and I missed a few recesses. In a story that's as old as time, the proverbial tormentor wants nothing to do with someone who will launch an unabashed offensive. What started as mocking and crude insults ended as an altercation that would be talked about over the rest of the week at school. It was a tremendous learning experience. The difference between offensive and defensive operations would be etched in my mind from the fourth grade, through all of my later military training. Fourth grade foundation is built. When the opportunity exists to be on the offensive versus the defensive, carpe diem. It was 1980, and God blessed me with the Smith brothers to learn the stark differentiation between defensive and offensive operations at a very young age. Decades later, men I would lead on patrol would curse me based on these lessons ingrained in my mind from this childhood experience. I wanted to be on the offensive. In seventh grade, I moved from the country to a small town, Marshfield, Wisconsin. Peter was a great man who lived a couple blocks down from me. Peter was a man of the town. Everyone knew Peter. Peter went to daily mass. Daily mass was novel to me as I grew up in an environment of only one mass being available all week long. Peter also ran everywhere. In the over 5 years that I knew him, I do not think I ever saw him in a car or ever heard a story of him in a car. Peter blew open the doors off the idea of running a certain time every day. Peter scoffed at the idea of driving somewhere in a blizzard or summer rain. Peter walked everywhere. He walked or ran everywhere. This baseline for normality would pay dividends for me in military training and operations later in life. It was 1983, and God blessed me with Peter to learn there are no limitations on moving via foot. A similar lesson was uttered in 1776. Where a goat can go, a man can go. And where a man can go, he can drag a gun. Moving into high school, Coach Cole was the football coach at Marshfield Columbus. Coach K made it so everyone had a fair shot to play and even be a starter. So there was a place in the starting lineup for an undersized guy who loved the run and hit. Who knew? That is not the highlight or the point of Coach K. Can you imagine, if you're a New England Patriots fan or a New York Football Giants fan, can you imagine running the same play, the first play of every game, every season, every playoff game? We did. It was the 41 buck sweep. Can you imagine running the mirror version of that play for the second play of the game, every season, every playoff? We did. It was a 29 buck sweep. Can you imagine a halftime show for the high school girls basketball game being parents, grade schoolers, and other spectators coming out from the stands to run the 49 buck sweep? Can you imagine the children after mass running the 49 buck sweep in the front of church? A forward pass? Forget about it. 49 buck sweep. Everyone in town knew how to run the 49 buck sweep. You were booed by your peers if you got it wrong. You were encouraged to go back and make right your ways. While humorous and entertaining, it was culture. The 49 buck sweep was culture. It was 1989, and God blessed me with Coach K to have a fair chance to play and start. And most importantly, learn the value of culture to a community. Culture matters. Jeff B was the heart and soul of that football team at Marshfield Columbus. He was not the fastest nor the strongest. He was the hardest worker. He led the way with work ethic. Jeff was one of the most upstanding people I've ever met. Jeff was a couple years older than me. Our first game of the year, every year, was against Milwaukee University High School. It was over a 4-hour bus ride for the butterflies to build in your stomach for this game. Why would we play Marquette every year? Well, my school, Marshfield Columbus, was 180 children co-ed school with a highly competitive football team. Marquette was a 1,000-person all-boys school. They were willing to take on the risk of playing us every year and potentially losing to us. Marquette was the only team to have a standing preseason game with us. They had that kind of courage. Halfway through the ride to Milwaukee, my heart sunk. In the excitement to get on the bus for the first game of the season and take on the Goliath of Marquette, I had forgotten my cleats. I was devastated. No way I could say anything to Coach K. Who had an extra pair of cleats I could borrow? Jeff B. The kindness in Jeff's eyes was priceless. The feeling of hopelessness of showing up to a football game with no cleats was profound. To this day, I encourage my children to keep track of their kit. Of note, Jeff B is now Monsignor Jeff B. He is still the heart and soul. It was 1989, and God blessed me with Jeff B to underscore the paramount importance of keeping track of your kit. This valuable lesson would pay dividends time after time in the military. Terry prefaced some of these comments I want to make here in his opening comments. The Marine Corps taught me so much about life, death, brotherhood, pain, love, discipline, and so much more. One of the most profound lessons was humility. In 1991, we were in the middle of a peace dividend with the trouncing of Iraq in 100 hours fresh in the rearview mirror. The Corps was filled with athletes, woodsmen, guys from rough neighborhoods. You name it, they were there. I walked into boot camp with visions of being at the front of the pack. What a sobering reality boot camp was. It was difficult, more difficult than I could ever imagine. I was barely above pedestrian. Many were faster than me, many were stronger than me. Many were better with a rifle than me. Many were better with their hands than me. As it should be, the physicality of the process never let up. First day, the drill instructors provide us the opportunity to do two things: to be smart Marine recruits or be strong Marine recruits. In hindsight, this appears to be a bait and switch. There was a solution for every challenge we as Marine recruits would be faced with. As luck would have it, the solution was simple and easily executable. Push-ups. You forgot a word from the Marines hymn? Push-ups. You twisted your ankle? Push-ups. You ran too slow? Push-ups. Your buddy ran too slow? Push-ups. You didn't get any mail? Push-ups. You got too much mail? Push-ups. We did laundry every Sunday by hand with a brush. We were trained to be reliant on nothing but the Marine to your left and right. As Terry said earlier, few fight wars to eliminate the enemy. Some do, but very few. Most fight wars, battles, because of love of what is at home and love for their brother to the left and right. It was 1991, and God blessed me with a brotherhood to continue the great work my mother and father had started. The Marine Corps finished me as a man. It was unequivocally the greatest decision I had made in my life. In the Fleet Marine Corps, I fell into a very comfortable battle rhythm. I fell into a very comfortable battle rhythm. I flourished in the routine of the hard work, the love of the Corps, and the love of the Marine to my left and right. In the fall of 1992, I would go to Fort Benning 10 Airborne School, and as luck would have it, we were hustled out of Fort Benning to return to our home base in California to deploy to Somalia. Ed L. was our battalion commander, and a Mustang. A Mustang is an enlisted Marine who later earns a commission to be an officer. Mustangs are revered in the Fleet Marine Corps. They have walked the walk, and now they are talking the talk. By December 1992, we were conducting operations in Mogadishu, Somalia. On January 12th, we lost Domingo Arroyo in a well-planned out and well-equipped three-sided ambush. Domingo Arroyo was the point man in the patrol. Domingo died, laying down fire for the rest of the squad. It was surreal. It was the first time I had experienced death up close. Domingo was a veteran of the Iraq War in 1990, 1991. Ed L., the battalion commander, had a challenge. He had a Marine killed in action on a humanitarian mission. Up until that day, we were not permitted to take machine guns or hand grenades on patrol with us. It was a humanitarian mission. Our corpsman, which is a Navy medic, only had a 9mm. Ed L., our battalion commander, took a politically unpopular tact and immediately pushed Marines out of the Mogadishu airport to occupy forward positions in Mogadishu. We would now take grenades and machine guns on patrol. Our platoon would occupy a home in a residential neighborhood in the triangle between K4, the main intersection, the airport, and the university. We were now landowners. We would run 4-hour shifts, 4 hours of patrol, 4 hours of perimeter security at the home that we were occupying, 4 hours of rest where you could close your eyes and sleep, and 4 hours where you on react, where you were kitted up, ready to go. If whoever was out on patrol got into a gunfight, you would go help them. Over the next 5 months, under Ed L.'s leadership, we would not take another KIA. I would leave Somalia 160 pounds at 6'3". It was a very high operational tempo. God blessed me and all the other Marines there with the tremendous leadership of Ed L., our battalion commander. To this day, I make an effort to call him periodically. He's living in, I think he has a home in California, Oregon, and is living a great life. His son, interestingly, is now a colonel in the Marine Corps as an infantry officer. During one of our countless patrols, we came upon a Somalian man who had been shot, I believe, 13 times. He was a small man, as are most men in Somalia. And we came upon this. It was a great disturbance, and our duty was to help people out as a humanitarian mission. So we put this guy in the back of our Humvee, and everybody wanted to come. Everybody was a brother, everybody was an uncle, everybody was a sister, a mom, a dad. Everybody wanted to jump in the Humvee. We couldn't have that. We brought one person with, and I was providing local security around the Humvee. And I'll never forget, I thought it was, the crowd was moving in on me, and I felt very helpless. And out of nowhere, my roommate, Melvin, with one arm, picked me up and threw me in the back of the Humvee. Melvin and I had been attached to the hip our entire Marine Corps career. You'll know that the Marine Corps is a very linear organization. Melvin's last name was M.O. I'll not say his whole last name, but it started M.O. Mine's P.A. It's alphabetical. We were attached to the hip. Melvin was an amazing man who, I don't know if he saved my life that day, but he certainly did save me from great harm. In the entire time that Melvin and I served together, I'll never forget that he never uttered a curse word. He's from Alabama, and he would say, "Foot boy, what are you doing?" "Oh, Paksi, this is some bull-s." It was 1993, and God blessed me with Melvin. It was also 1993 that God blessed Domingo Arroyo to go to heaven to be with his family. I'll stop there. I haven't even touched any of the Afghanistan things, but I'll stop there, as I expect many of these things will come up in the questions.
Thank you, Charles. Chip?
Charles, thank you for sharing. Paul, parenthetically, I think we ought to do a lot more of this. There are a lot of brothers on this call that, there are details and history and background of their lives that I don't know. And Charles, thank you for being so thorough. So, it's obvious to see that you're very grateful for the men that have been an important part of your life. Could you talk a little bit about the women?
Could I talk a little about the women with regards to what, Chip?
That were important in your life?
Oh, sure. Well, the two women who certainly were most important were my mother and my wife. So my mother was, for those of you who have met me, I used to be 6'3". I'm about 6'1" now. My mother will tell you she's 5 foot. She's 4'11", and she was a dear lady who also shared many of the same concepts that my father did of peacefulness and of thought versus action and things of that nature. But she was great. Love my mother to death. She's coming out here to visit me next month, visit the family. We have a new grandchild for her to visit. Caught me on my heels a little bit there, Chip. But my mother's awesome. I remember saying this to my wife years ago, as we reflected upon some of our friends who were newly married or had been married a few years, and I said to her unequivocally, in the relationships that we were privy to, I was like, the wife is the governor. And what I meant by that is the wife is going to be the limitator. The wife is going to either propel the husband to do great things or hamstring him to potentially not be able to do great things if they're not in sync. And I have to tell you, I lead a very privileged life. Many of you have met my wife. She's amazing, and she's doing a wonderful job raising our 3 children and keeping me in line. And I'm very blessed there. You caught me on my heels, though, Chip. Good question.
These are not my questions. These are the brothers' questions, Charles.
Okay.
I'm just a vehicle. Tell us, you talked about inheriting a lot of lessons, a lot of life lessons that wound up being very important and serving you well. And obviously, your father was an incredibly important figure in your life for those life lessons. Tell us a little bit about your faith inheritance. Where did you inherit your faith from?
So faith inheritance, where did it come from? My father was a big part of that. My mother was Catholic as well. So I grew up in the middle of Wisconsin, northern middle section, which, some of you have heard me tell this story, but there's a lot of truth to it. I think the Diocese of La Crosse is the highest ratio of Catholics to non-Catholics in the entire world. I mean, if there's 100 people in the room, there's 97 Catholics, 2 Lutherans, and 1 other person. Like that's what's in central Wisconsin. So it was kind of, going back again to Coach Kroll and running a 49 buck week. It was culture. So I grew up as a man of faith because the men and women to my left and right were men and women of faith. Is that what we did? That's what you did. You went to church. The stores were closed on Sundays. Like you couldn't do anything on Sunday. I don't even think you could get gas on Sunday. So that's how I grew up. My parents made a concerted effort to make sure I received the Catholic education, and I received the sacraments. And then when I went to boot camp, that was very exciting because Sunday, if you went they didn't have mass in boot camp. They had a non-denominational service. If you went to service, like that was an hour where you weren't doing push-ups, you weren't getting yelled at. You could go to a happy place and listen to the scripture. It was wonderful. It was beautiful. And I was the one person that was beyond excited to go to service, to go to worship. And as a result, they actually made me the layperson of my platoon, which I was like, okay, great, I'll do that. And it provided me an opportunity to, there's a couple of Marines on this call, to have an unofficial billet, not in leadership, but certainly someone where people look to you for leadership. It wasn't an official Marine Corps billet or official boot camp billet, but it was somewhere where people would come talk to you just as much as they would come talk to the squad leaders or the guide, looking for insights and ideas, or maybe just to be a sounding board. So on that, here, I'll run down the rabbit hole a little further. The other thing to think about, is I'm the sounding board as a layperson that the drill instructors have so appointed me as such. There's people in boot camp that had never been on a plane before. There's people in boot camp that have never left their hometown before. This was it. when we went to Somalia in 1992, there was much chatter that this was going to be huge. This is going to be like the 1991 Gulf War. And what did we know? Well, I certainly had no idea. I was a 19-year-old Marine. I was like, all right, well, here we go. Like, I've got my kit and we're going to go. So what they did is they brought officers and enlisted straight to the unit to take you to 100% or maybe even over 100% of manning, so that we weren't missing any personnel. And then you would do on-the-job training, figure it out while you were in Mogadishu. And I'll never forget this guy. He was from Ohio, of all places. I forget his name, but he was a nice enough guy. And nobody would talk to him in the beginning. And I talked to him. I'll talk to anybody. I think most of you here that met me in person will know I'll talk to anybody. I talked to him, and people were looking at me like, why are you talking to him? I'm like, what's the big deal? He's a new guy. Like, whatever, break his stones. We'll give him a hard time. He's the new guy. And Melvin was black, and Melvin pulled me off to the side. He's like, do you know that he's racist or something to that effect? I was like, what? Why wouldn't you say that? I was like, I talked to him. He seems totally fine. He's like, well, he grew up in a community where like the Ku Klux Klan was like the town. That's what they did. And this gentleman who was new to our unit was literally afraid to touch black people because he thought their skin would rub off. Like that it was that type of, this guy came from that. He wasn't a bad person. And he turned out to be a just fine Marine. He did his job, and his poorly learned ideas that adults and peers had taught him over years were unwound. And he came to realize that we were all good guys and we would all work together, and we'd break his stones for being a knucklehead, and we would all be fine. We would all go on patrol together and help each other out. But I fell down that rabbit hole. I forget the question, Chip.
So tell us about your born again experience. When did you become?
Okay, thanks, Chip. So that's a little bit tough. I don't, because candidly, I don't, and this is, I think I've talked with Paul about this and a few others of you. I don't know that I've had a born again experience. However, I will share with you, I'll share with you a couple of things real quick in that direction. So first of all, if you have something to write this down, because you'll forget it, because it's super simple. If you haven't seen the movie The Outpost, go see the movie The Outpost. It's on Netflix. It's $4. It's a great movie, and it's very real. And the story I'm going to tell you runs parallel to that. So the events of Outpost took place in 2009. Two gentlemen were earned the Medal of Honor for their actions there. It was a terrible battle, and watch the movie. It's a very good movie. One of the Medal of Honor recipients actually was very involved in the creation of the movie. So 6 months later, I'm not too far from there, and I'm coming in a helicopter, and this is going to be my home for the next year. And we're coming in, and yes, it's mountains. So mountains are beautiful, right? We're coming in, and I didn't really know what type of scenario I was walking into. There's gonna be mountains. Like, all right, great. So there's mountains. I was an infantry mountain unit. That's what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to conduct operations in mountains. Well, the helicopter comes to the forward operating base, Kalagoosh, which was at the time, I believe, the furthest northern position. And it's a bowl. It's literally a bowl. I think we were 17,000 feet in elevation in the bowl. To the north, east, and west, it was 21,000 feet of elevation, and to the south was a river valley. And I don't know that this is a born again moment, but wow, I thought that was it. Like when we landed in the helicopter, I was like, wow, this is bad. Like if things go sideways here, I don't know that we walk out of this alive. And if any of you have ever seen the movie, the miniseries from World War II, and I've just forgotten the name of it, World War II miniseries. Anyways, if you actually, and I don't mean this to be fantasizing about death, but if you put yourself like, I'm kind of dead today, so let's just work hard every day, and every day is a gift after that. That's kind of how I looked at that scenario from there. Band of Brothers, if someone said that. Yeah, in Band of Brothers, they actually say that when they're in the forest and they're taking all the incoming. Like it's much easier for you to look at each day as a gift versus try to get to each day. It's a different type of mentality. So anyways, again, I fell down the rabbit hole, Chip.
So it said that there are no atheists in a foxhole.
Yeah, absolutely.
Can you tell us about wartime converts and how you were a witness for Jesus?
So sure, a teed up softball question. I'll critique it real quick, and not to be funny, but there is a nuance. Fox run, Marines, infantrymen fight, so they're fighting holes. So, anyways, now that I've articulated that, we'll move on. I've certainly been a sounding board. I don't know if I've had one of those dramatic moments where, like, hey, listen to me, let's read the Bible together, and now you're a believer. I can't say that. That would be disingenuous. But however, what I can share is over the years, people have come to me with questions of how to achieve this, how to be an officer, how to join the military, how to transfer from one element to another element in the military, how to move into a more kinetic environment within the military, more kinetic capabilities. And the conversations often, certainly years ago, 10, 15 years ago, the conversation was like, well, I can run this fast, I can do this many push-ups, I can do sit-ups, and I'm really strong. Do you think did I do everything? Am I good? I'm like, yeah. Those are table stakes. That's what it takes to get in. Like that's expected. Everyone's expected to be big, fast, strong, smart, and be able to shoot well, right? Like that's table stakes. And I still have these conversations with folks, and they've become more comprehensive over the years because the people coming in and looking for guidance, I think, are more comprehensive. Some things don't change, but some things do evolve. And the conversation now is great. You have table stakes. Let's talk about your finances. Let's talk about your career. Let's talk about your parents. Let's talk about your girlfriend, your fiance, your wife, your family. What are you going to do a year from now, 3 years from now, 5 years from now? What does that look like? Oh, and you so definitively and so certainly want to be in a kinetic environment where you're going to be chasing bad guys down in bad areas and doing bad things to them. Great. Talk to me about your faith. What do you believe in? And like, I think the first question, about women put me on my heels. I didn't come into this meeting today in the thought of talking about my mother and my wife, who are wonderful, amazing people, and certainly are much tougher than I am. That same way that I was on my heels, and you all saw that in that question and answer there, the first one, that's how some of these guys were and still are today when I bring up faith. Not as interesting enough, not as much as it used to be. People are starting to get that. It's the whole composite person. It's not just, I got big biceps, I do curls, and I can swim really far in the water. Like, that's great. Like, that's good. But let's take it to the next level. I'll move on.
Thank you, Charles. Next question. What are you doing now, and what are your hopes or dreams?
So I have no hopes. Hope's a terrible plan. Hope will get you ambushed all day, every day, and twice on Sunday. So certainly I have dreams and aspirations. I'm living part of my dream right now. I'm married to my wonderful wife, Alexis. We have 3 children, and they're blossoming before our eyes, and that's wonderful. I lead strategic initiatives over at LTM Wealth in my civilian career, and I'll stop there. My buddy Sal just chimed in here on the comments. I got to tell you guys a story. I don't know if you saw this. Sal at 8'11". I've known Charles for 20 years. He's an unbelievable mentor. Yada yada. Sal's a great man. Sal makes me look like a speck of gravel on the road. Sal is a man amongst men. So Sal and I met in 2000, and this will take us to 8:15 probably. So I'm sorry, I'm not sorry here. So Sal and I met each other in 2000 when I first came out here. I moved out here in September of 2000, and we were in the same unit in West Hampton. He's a young fella at the time. There's probably about 8 years difference between two of us, and 8 years at 28 to 20 is a big difference, or 27 to 19, whatever it was. So he's a young fella, and I'd been in combat in Somalia, so I was kind of a big deal, and I expected people to part like the Red Sea when I walked through. Sal's having none of that. Bump into me, wouldn't say anything. He was respectful to me, wasn't disrespectful, but like wasn't giving me extended courtesy, shall we say. So we didn't really talk to each other. It's one of the few people in the unit that we just didn't talk to each other, walk by each other, whatever. So shortly before 9/11, very shortly before, potentially in the weeks before, maybe it was right after. Actually, no, I think it was right after 9/11. So 9/11 was on a Tuesday, not that Saturday, but next Saturday I was in orders. And we were trying to figure out what to do, how to pack up, what to take with us. And it was like we were figuring it out. And we were in the break room, and Sal had thrown some lamb in the microwave. And my father's from the old country, lamb's a big deal. I was like, wow. I was like, is that Sal? Or excuse me, I was like, is that lamb in there? And Sal was like, yeah, it sure is. Would you like some? I was like, I certainly would. Thank you. That was dinner on 10, 15 days after 9/11. The next day I was at his family's home for dinner. Sal was one of my groomsmen in my wedding. We deployed together in 2001, 2002. And he ran missions in many of those countries with which I mentioned as well.
Hey, Sal, when you unmute yourself for a second, Charles was starting to read your comment, but those watching on video aren't going to get it. So would you take like 1 minute and just express what Charles summed up as yada yada, the rest of what you said? All right, if Sal's not going to unmute, I'm going to read the yada yada. I've known Charles for 20 years. He's been an unbelievable mentor since the day I met him. His story is in fact very impressive, but what he is not telling you is how he has helped so many grow to be great Americans with strong values. It is one thing to take care of yourself, but another to teach and help the man to your right and left. Thank you, Sal. Back to you, Chip.
So we need a downrange story, Charles.
So I have plenty of them. So I'll share a downrange story that has to do with, it won't be as sexy as you want, but it encompasses a thought that I try to share with people very often. And interesting enough, that thought has driven many things in my life, to include what I'm doing on the civilian side right now with Altium. And it's
Charles,
this.
you might want to explain what a downrange story is.
Sure. Downrange is, in one of the forward environments, whether it be Afghanistan, Iraq, Africa, or one of the other places that great Americans are taking the fight to the bad guys. So I'm actually going to continue the story from landing on the helicopter. And, that was the closest thing that I could come to is not a born again moment, but one where I was sobering, like this might be it. I've always been boring and gone to church all the time. So it wasn't like I was coming back to church or looking for Jesus. So helicopter lands, we get in, we get briefed on what's going on, and we're going to be going on a patrol later. I think it was the same day. And I go over to the Tactical Operations Center, TOC. It's a plywood structure that actually was laid out really nicely. You could walk in there, and if you kind of knew what was going on, in a matter of 3 minutes, you should be able to identify all the different folks that were in the TOC, what they were doing, what their capabilities were, and how you could leverage them as a leader for your element. So this other officer walked by, and I said, "Hey, bro, what do you do around here?" Real nice fella. His name was Charles as well. He's like, "I'm the fires officer." And I was like, "Ah, great. It's cool. Like, what do you fire?" He's like, "Well, we have 2 155s and 3 120s. 155s are these big howitzer guns." I'm like, "I just fell out of the sky in a helicopter. I didn't see them." He's like, "Oh, we have them folded up and they're under some camionets." I'm like, "Great job. I didn't see them." And then they had, they were actually leveraging 3 of our 120 millimeter mortars. So they had plenty of people and the expertise to do it. So we're going out on patrol. And he's like, "Well, hey, I'm going to give you all the answers to the test. Here's the valley, and then there's sub valleys that come off of it. And here's the 30 places that you're going to get attacked from, which are the same 30 places that everybody that's ever deployed here has been attacked from, the same 30 places that the Russians were attacked from, the same 30 places that the British were attacked from." I'm like, "Are you kidding me?" He's like, "Oh, no. Like, it's all the same." I'm like, "Okay." I'm like, "Great. All right. So we're going to go out." And so this patrol I think I'm going on, we're going to go past 2 or 3 of these places. He's like, "Yeah. So like, if you're going to take contact from the enemy, it's going to be one of those places." I'm like, "All right, cool. Got it." So when I take contact and I want you to start shooting the big guns, am I sending you a 10-digit grid coordinate, an 8-digit grid coordinate, their position, my position? what type of round I want you to shoot, what type of fuse, where the round's going to explode. Do you need barometric pressure? Like, what do you want? I'm a math guy. I'm really smart. Let me show you how smart I am. And he's like, I don't know. Stop. He's like, I don't need any of that. I'm like, well, how are we going to do this? This is how I was trained and I'm very good at it. And he's like, no, we don't do that. We have what's called target reference points. So as soon as you take contact and you think you need artillery to help out the fight, then you call into target reference point 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever it is. I'm like, really? He's like, yeah. And then, we hit these target reference points are either known enemy locations or the peak of a mountain where there's not going to be any civilians or cattle or anything like that. And then we hit that, and then we walk it left, right, forward, or back to get to where you want it. I'm like, wow, that seems like very simple and awesome. And I was like, oh, okay, I'll do that. He's like, but even better, he's like, you don't do it. I'm like, well, if I don't do it, who's going to do it? He's like, well, have your forward observer call my fires NCO, and they'll square everything away. They'll do the math too. I'm like, this is fantastic. So sure enough, we end up in a scenario where we need that, and it hums quite nicely. Right? We get the artillery, and everybody's a tough guy until artillery starts falling out of the sky, and then people aren't as tough. And I guess a caveat of the story that I left out is in the patrol briefings, I don't even know if I would brief it that often. In the beginning, I probably did, but it was a known that the enemy had desires to take one of our smaller soldiers. Like, that's what they wanted to do. They would love to take one of us alive. So if you had a choice between me and anybody else, you would probably choose somebody else because they're probably smaller than me. But we did have some smaller fellows where it was a reasonable consideration, and they want to close that distance. The enemy wants to get in tight to you, so you can't call in the artillery to sway to change the pitch of the battle. So sure enough, happens. Little rudimentary, little heart skip, and it came in, and sure enough, artillery comes, and the bad guys don't want to play anymore. And this would go on over time, and we would get better at it. And by we, I'm probably the smallest part of that equation of we. It was just a matter of muscle memory and doing it over and over, just like anything else in life. And there was a peer of mine who made a stink of the fact that he was not getting the indirect fires, which are artillery and mortars, that I was getting, and said some very disparaging things about me in a public forum, amongst pretty aggressive men. And I was a little taken back, and then the question was pointed to me, like, how do you get artillery all the time? And I'm like, I don't do much. Like, I was kind of speechless. He's like, well, I'm doing all this work. I'm calling in 10-digit grid coordinates. I'm giving enemy positions. There's 3-4 positions, all this, that, and the other. And being the smartest guy in the room, he was creating much more chaos and confusion to the matter, where the buddy that I ran into, the fires officer, he lacked the confidence in my peer who was out there in a pitched battle. He lacked the confidence to send an artillery round out there that he would be sending it in the correct direction at the enemy and where there wasn't friendly forces. He lacked that confidence, so he wouldn't do it. And which candidly was probably the right thing to do. But it's an overarching lesson that I tell people, particularly when I'm speaking with civilians, but certainly the veterans on this call can this will resonate with them as well, is that it's not necessarily a benefit to be the smartest guy in the room and to demonstrate your high level of intellectual capability. What's more important is that you understand the cogs of the wheel and you're able to get them to work together. Because in most businesses, whether it's the infantry, whether it's the Marine Corps, whether it's wealth management, it's the team that's going to drive the success, not necessarily Paul Mahalski being the smartest guy in the room or Chip being the fastest guy, the strongest guy. It's conglomeration of all these things together that drives on success. I bloviated, and it probably wasn't as sexy of a downrange story as you might have asked for, but there you go.
I'm glad I'm fast and strong.
Right.
So one of the men asked a question, Charles. Given the things that you've seen and some of the stories that you've shared, and I'm sure that your sharing of them is filtered for our benefit.
Sure.
Talk a little bit about what it is to be in a foreign land and killing other human beings, and if there's any PTSD element to your life today.
Sure. So I'll state this very simply. You know, we're starting to have a greater consciousness. I don't know about starting. I think probably started about 10 years ago, maybe even before that. We're starting to have a greater consciousness for dynamic events, certainly negative dynamic events that happen in people's lives and how they shape them. You know, back in World War II, they called it shell shock, right? Now we call it PTSD. And now we see that you can get PTSD by witnessing anything, or not anything, but witnessing traumatic events. Police officers have PTSD for some of the terrible things that they see every day. You know, Rev's on the call. I can only imagine, or I assume Rev's on. I thought I saw him before. Yeah, there he is, John Revell. Rev's on here. I can only imagine the things that he's heard from law enforcement officials. But I would say this to you, you know, it's so very specific to your question. Remember, I was 19 years old in Somalia. That was my first time in combat. You know, then I went back again. I don't even know how old I was. Close to 30 years old in Afghanistan the second time, and then 37 the third time. So 19, you're still forming. And I had the benefit of being one of a very few group of young guys. And we had all these older guys that were just over in Iraq in 1990, 1991. Like, I don't care how big, strong, fast, and smart you were. You just kind of you were a tag along, and you followed the big dogs, and you did what they did. And how they dealt with things, you know, they talked about it, and it was helpful. Their leadership was very helpful, and you know, it helped, right? You know, you come back, and you can't unsee the devil. So whether it's Rev and his law enforcement friends, or any other terrible thing, you see a car accident where there's a terrible tragedy, you can't unsee tragedy. You can't unsee the devil, but what you can do is figure out what you're going to do with it going forward. And you know, I've been, you know, I've certainly had, you know, some thoughts and some dreams over time that are not ideal. I still have a habit of, you know, taking long walks at EENT and BMNT, and for the Marines on the call, you know, that's ending evening nautical twilight and beginning morning nautical twilight, also known as when the French and Indians attack. Also known as the same time that movie, The Outpost, which you all wrote down and you're going to watch, the attack on the outpost began. It's a time when it's the coldest and the body is the most tired. So I still have that muscle memory in me. Does that mean I have PTSD? Does that mean that I'm not able to cope in society? It just means that my body's ready to fight when nobody else's is. I think I'm totally fine, Chip. If you have a different opinion, I'd be happy to hear it.
Not at all, Charles. It is, thank you for entertaining so many personal questions and being so honest with us. Thank you.
You're welcome, Chip.
Paul, I'm going to turn it over back to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Chip. Charles, I'm going to throw one more in since I'm the smartest guy and Chip's the fastest guy. I think.
Sure.
Several years ago, we had a Navy chaplain speak to our group.
Okay.
We'd done a deployment with Marines. And he said one of the most amazing things was a speech he heard a Marine general give to his men. And he said to them, he said, men, fear is an emotion. Courage cannot overcome fear because courage is not an emotion. The only thing that can overcome fear is a stronger emotion. And the only emotion stronger than fear is love. It is your love for one another. Could you just comment on that and your experience in the Marine Corps with love and the importance of that?
Yeah, I mean, so it's you know, to this day. So I walked in a room. You know this, Paul. I walked into a room last night, night before last, and there was a Marine in the room, and it was immediate. There was eye contact made. I had never met this gentleman before, and we both knew that we were Marines. And if he ever called me for anything, he's like, "Hey, Charles, I need a solid." I'd be like, "Yeah, hold on, let's talk about it. What can I do to help you?" So yeah, it's all about that. There's a movie, Black Hawk Down. And Hoot is the main character in there, and he says something to the effect of, people back home don't understand. You know, it's not about, you know, being a hero. It's about the man to your left and right. It's all about the love. And I referenced that a couple of times in my comments in the beginning. And that's it's the foundation. It's why all this works. When you start to have a breakdown in culture, and you know, there's lack of brotherhood, there's lack of love for the guy next to you. You don't have to like him. There's plenty of guys I've expressed love for that I did not like, and I've told it to their face. It's fine. Like, you don't have to like everybody. And there's plenty of guys in 2000 and whatever that year is, 2010, when I was downrange. I can tell you, there's plenty of guys that highly disliked me. To this day, one of them's on my team at LTM. I can tell you that gentleman highly disliked me for an entire year. But that doesn't change the emotion of love. He probably wouldn't say he loves me. I love him happily. He probably loves me, but he'll probably never say it out loud. But that's okay. So I'm piling on to the softball question you threw out there, Paul, and it's a big deal. Some guys realize it, some guys don't realize it. But the other thing that I say is a very big positive is that when you have an institution like the Marine Corps or the National Guard, the infantry certainly is one of the more kinetic parts of the National Guard. You'll have some of the older guys, and older is a relative term. Older could be 30 years old. Older guys that understand that, and they'll pass that down. The young guys won't embrace that right away, but as they see, like, one of the older 30-year-olds is giving the other 32-year-old a hug, and they're helping each other out. They don't like each other. Those guys were just talking smack about each other 3 minutes ago, but now they're helping each other out. They figure out that the love's more important than the like or admiration.
Well, thank you, Charles. And as we wrap this up, I want to give a shout out. I see one of the guys who's been on this call is Dan Buttafuoco from Long Island, who is the guy who introduced Charles to NCS. So we have Dan to thank for you being part of our brotherhood here.
I didn't know you were going to be here, but thanks for making time. So real quick for everybody here, one of the things I make a habit of doing is I ask people, what can I do to be helpful to you? I'll help anybody in time. Dan told me about NCS probably about 2003. He told me about NCS. I was too busy for NCS until about 5-7 years ago. And I tremendously regret that. So Dan, thank you very much for introducing it to me. And I would encourage and challenge every single one of you on this call to find one person to be on an NCS call or in-person meeting if we go back to in-person by the end of the year. One other person. Somebody else that would benefit from this. Go find them, bring them on, find a speaker that resonates with them, and bring them here. Paul and all these other gentlemen do all this great work to make sure that this environment is here. Let's take advantage of it and let's help one another.